My name is Amber Mitchell. At 29, I believed I had grown accustomed to being let down by my relatives. Being cut out of the Christmas festivities had stung, but I had no clue what deeper betrayal waited just around the corner. That knowledge came in the form of an envelope. A thick stack of papers addressed to me, neatly tucked inside a manila sleeve, turned my stomach when I realized what I held: a $52,000 invoice tied to my younger sibling's new luxury vehicle. Jessica had somehow managed to place the burden of her irresponsibility squarely onto my shoulders, and something inside me broke for good. 10 years of subtle coercion and calculated emotional games had come to this. And this time, they had gone too far. I wasn't just disappointed anymore. I was enraged. Furious enough to make a single call that would unravel everything they had taken for granted. While you sit surrounded by those you trust, thinking love is unconditional, remember this: appearances often lie. And if your bloodline is based on manipulation, then you'll understand why I finally walked away. I was raised in Westchester County, nestled in a spacious colonial home that screamed affluence: 5 bedrooms, pristine hedges, and a garage with more cars than occupants. From a distance, the Mitchells looked enviable. My father Richard made a name for himself managing portfolios, while my mother Diana flourished as the queen of local philanthropy. Private schools, weekend ski trips, and lavish summer camps, everything was curated to maintain an image. But within those pristine walls, affection was always conditional, and every act of kindness came with a price tag. Jessica entered our lives when I was 4. From the moment she drew breath, the entire household revolved around her. Where I was quiet, she demanded attention. Where I followed rules, she smashed them with flair. Naturally, they idolized her. Her tantrums were labeled passionate. My emotions? Too much. My achievements? Expected. Hers? Celebrated. When Jessica longed for equestrian training, she got it within a week. I had to maintain flawless grades just to negotiate piano lessons, and even then, I had to justify every dollar. At 16, she received an Audi. I got a well-worn Honda with a reminder to be practical. Yet I never rebelled. I stayed focused. Excelled academically. Graduated top of my class. Earned a full ride to Cornell. Chose a dual degree in business and economics. Landed internships while Jessica flitted between majors like hobbies. By my mid-20s, I had my own apartment in Manhattan, a growing investment portfolio, and no need to ask for help. That autonomy came with a steep cost. Every reunion became a subtle campaign to chip away at my confidence. My mother would smirk at my one bedroom and ask, "Still no serious partner?" My father would comment on how Jessica was living in the moment, as if my discipline was dull. All the while, they leaned on my success. It began with innocent-sounding requests. Jessica was behind on rent. Could I spot her until her project took off? Dad needed temporary funds for a high-yield deal. Mom's gala needed a sponsor. Surely I could help. At first, I thought helping meant belonging. But the truth? Each favor opened the door for larger demands. 3 years ago, Jessica came crying about her $12,000 credit card balance. I paid it, hoping it would mark a turning point. 6 months later, she used a fresh card to book a luxury trip to Bali. When I dared to question it, my mother sighed and said, "Jessica simply experiences life differently, dear. Be grateful you're so stable." The hypocrisy was staggering. Just last year, I took care of their property tax bill, tens of thousands, because they were struggling, only to find out they'd just bought a second home in the Hamptons. When I raised an eyebrow, my father said, "You wouldn't be where you are without us." He conveniently omitted my scholarships and the mountain of student loans I'd paid off myself. Still, like a moth drawn to a flame, I kept trying. That October, I invited them to spend a weekend in Manhattan. My treat. I booked a luxurious suite, reserved Broadway tickets for a show Jessica had raved about, and arranged a 5-star dinner. My mother spent most of the trip critiquing my neighborhood. Jessica? She spent every second talking about her latest breakup, barely acknowledging me. After that visit, Jessica began escalating. She started calling me during meetings, frantically begging for cash. When I failed to reply within the hour, she'd text things like, "Wow. Must be nice to be so busy you can't even care." At the same time, my parents doubled down on comparing us, often implying that Jessica's chaos was the sign of someone truly living, while my structured life was somehow joyless. By the time December crept in, I had already bought their gifts, rehearsed polite small talk, and mentally prepared myself for yet another season of awkward silences and veiled insults. But I never imagined what they'd do next. The betrayal unfolded on an otherwise mundane Wednesday, during a short lunch break at work. As I scrolled through social media, an Instagram post from my cousin Taylor hit me like a freight train. The photo? My entire extended family, every cousin, aunt, uncle, even some distant relatives, posed in front of my parents' enormous Christmas tree. The caption? Early Christmas with the whole Mitchell clan. So much love. So lucky. Except, I wasn't there. I zoomed in. My father, carving the roast. My mother, carefully arranging decorations. Jessica, arms flung around relatives I hadn't seen in years. Every face was present, everyone except mine. My fingers trembled as I dialed. My mother. She picked up on the fourth ring, her voice overly cheerful. Amber, darling. How are you? I asked directly. Why wasn't I invited to the Christmas gathering? A pause. Then a dismissive tone. Oh, that? It was last minute. Jessica mentioned you had plans, so we assumed you were unavailable. I hadn't told Jessica anything of the sort. When I pointed that out, my mother's response was a melodramatic sigh. Please don't turn this into something bigger than it is. Jessica's been sensitive lately. We didn't want any tension. I knew exactly what that meant. Tension was code for my presence ruining their image. You've always been our strong one, she added sweetly. Translation, the one we can exclude without worrying about fallout. Before I could protest, she reminded me I was still invited to the real Christmas, on the actual day. An afterthought. A consolation prize. That evening, Jessica texted. Sorry you missed the party. Was epic. Mom said you were swamped anyway. By the way, what should we get her this year? Thinking. Diamond earrings. Can you chip in? No apology. No explanation. Just another thinly veiled demand. That night, I lay awake, re-examining every slight, every manipulation, every instance where I was expected to carry the weight for everyone else. And by morning, I was done. By sunrise, my clarity was sharp as glass. I didn't need another passive-aggressive dinner served with guilt gravy and topped with fake affection. I grabbed my phone and typed the shortest message I'd ever sent to my mother. I won't be attending Christmas Day. I have other plans. Within minutes, her response came buzzing through. What could be more important than family? 3 dots blinked, then stopped. No follow-up. No sincerity. Just disbelief that I'd actually declined family. That word, once sacred, now felt like a joke with a bitter punchline. Instead of responding, I reached out to Leah, my oldest friend, the one who'd extended holiday invites every year without fail, even after I declined repeatedly. Her home had always been filled with music, mismatched ornaments, and laughter that didn't come with a hidden agenda. Is your offer still open? I texted. Her reply was almost instant. Always. Mom already set a place for you. You're part of us, Amber. Those words, you're part of us, hit harder than any of Jessica's insults ever could. They were warm, real, effortless. No obligations. No receipts. Just kindness. In the days leading up to the 25th, I leaned into this unfamiliar feeling, belonging without performance. I baked cookies from scratch using Leah's grandmother's cherished recipe. I helped string popcorn garlands and tried to remember how it felt to laugh without pretense. Her father built a snowman with her younger cousins while her mother hummed carols in the kitchen. No judgment. No comparisons. Just presence. Meanwhile, my phone lit up like a firework factory. Dad left a voicemail dripping with disappointment. You're breaking your mother's heart. Jessica went from cold silence to rapid-fire texts about earrings, budget suggestions, and ultimately, her go-to line, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Even distant relatives I hadn't seen in years decided to play referees. Amber, whatever happened must have been a misunderstanding. You can't skip Christmas. That's not what family does. No. It's exactly what family like mine does. They rewrite the story and cast me as the villain. Only one message didn't make my skin crawl. Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, had always hovered slightly outside the Mitchell bubble. Never quite in, never completely out. I heard you're not coming, she said when I picked up. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was thoughtful. I didn't get an invite to the original gathering, I explained. Yeah, about that, she said, lowering her voice. That party was planned months ago. I saw the RSVP cards in Diana's kitchen back in September. It wasn't last minute. Silence stretched between us as the truth settled over me like snow on bare branches, quiet but heavy. She continued. Also, I don't know if you heard. Jessica wrecked her car. Drove it into a ditch after some drinks with friends. Your parents have been scrambling ever since, trying to replace it without touching their Hamptons renovation fund. There it was. The missing puzzle piece. I thanked Patricia for her honesty, hung up, and stared out the window. My family hadn't just forgotten me. They deliberately erased me. To protect Jessica's feelings. To protect their image. To protect their wallet. On Christmas Day, Leah's family wrapped me in warmth I hadn't known I needed. Her mother slipped me a mug of peppermint cocoa. Her father handed me a flannel blanket. Her cousins roped me into a chaotic board game. Nobody mentioned careers. Nobody asked why I was there instead of with my own kin. They didn't need a reason. I was welcome because I was me. When Leah's dad raised a glass and said, "To family, both chosen and given," I didn't cry. Not immediately. But something inside me shifted. I felt seen. And I realized I'd been chasing the wrong version of love for years. That night, I walked into my apartment carrying leftovers, a handmade ornament, and a heart that felt unburdened. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't compulsively check for missed calls from my parents. I didn't care about Jessica's cryptic Instagram captions or whether anyone had noticed my absence. I finally understood that family wasn't supposed to be earned. January in New York brought more than wind and slush, it brought something even stranger. Stillness. My phone was eerily quiet. No emergencies. No guilt trips. Just space to breathe. I went back to work and poured myself into numbers that followed logic. Deadlines that made sense. Projects with outcomes I could influence. With each passing week, the emotional fog lifted, replaced by a slow-burning determination. I signed up for that financial certification I'd been postponing. Started meal prepping again. Slept better. Thought clearer. Then, 3 weeks into the new year, everything cracked open again. It was a Thursday. I came home after a long day of meetings to find a thick envelope waiting in my mailbox. My name. My mother's handwriting. I took the elevator up to my apartment, slicing the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a blizzard of paperwork. The top page, a $52,000 invoice for a brand new luxury SUV. A buyer, Jessica Mitchell. Co-signer, Amber Mitchell. I blinked. Flipped the page. Loan terms, warranty details, insurance paperwork. Every line documented a loan I had supposedly agreed to, one I'd never seen, never signed, never authorized, and scrawled across the final page in Jessica's bubbly cursive, "Thanks for helping me out. I know you'll understand. First payments. Due February 1st. Zoxo. I dropped everything on the floor, heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't a mistake, this was war. My heart pounded louder than the elevator's hum as I reached my apartment. The folder containing those cursed documents spilled across the coffee table, its contents fanned out like a crime scene, because that's exactly what it was. Someone had signed my name. Not just a scribble. It was a near-perfect imitation of my actual signature, placed with precision beside the words, "co-signer," on a contract I'd never laid eyes on. I wasn't dealing with careless mistakes. This was deliberate. Coordinated. Calculated. I grabbed my phone, fingers clumsy with disbelief, and dialed the one number I swore I'd never call in anger again. Dad answered after a single ring. "Amber." He greeted smoothly, as if he'd been expecting this moment. "Did you receive the documents?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious right now? You forged my name on a 6-figure luxury vehicle loan." He exhaled, like I'd just accused him of exaggerating the importance of dinner reservations. "Amber, don't be theatrical. Jessica needed transportation. We assumed you'd want to help." "Assumed?" My voice cracked. "That's not my signature. That's fraud. Technically, your mother signed on your behalf." I could barely breathe. "She? What? She knows your handwriting better than anyone. It's not like you were going to say no, not really. You've always been generous." This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. She drove drunk, crashed her last car, and you rewarded her with a brand new Mercedes? Using my credit? Without permission? She has a job interview next week. She needs to look the part. The absurdity nearly made me laugh. Except it wasn't funny. That's not a reason. That's a fantasy. Dad's voice dipped into something colder. "Amber, she's your sister. We expected better from you. You're financially comfortable. You should be proud to support her." I hung up mid-sentence. Seconds later, the texts came flooding in. "Jessica, Dad says you're making this difficult. Jessica. Don't be petty. You don't even drive a Mercedes. Jessica, if you don't help, I'm literally screwed. You're ruining everything." My lungs felt tight. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of wine, and sat in silence. My hands shook as I opened my laptop. I typed, "What to do if someone forges your signature on a car loan," into a search engine. The results were immediate, and chilling. If I didn't report it, I could be legally responsible for the entire amount. I logged into my online banking account. A warning banner flashed across the top, "Unusual activity detected." My breath caught. I clicked through. Someone had attempted to access my high-yield savings, the one I'd earmarked for a down payment on my first home. The bank had locked it automatically due to an unfamiliar location and failed password attempts. I felt nauseous. After calling the bank's fraud line, I learned something worse. The login attempt came from a known device. My old laptop. The one I'd passed to my parents during the last family tech upgrade. My stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't about a car anymore. This wasn't misguided kindness. This was theft. Premeditated. Systematic. Later that night, I received an email from my mother. The subject line simply read, Amber. Inside, it was a masterclass in guilt. Your father is deeply hurt. Jessica cried for hours. I don't know what happened to the sweet daughter we raised. The car has already been purchased. Please don't cause a scene. Jessica wants to thank you publicly this weekend. She's so proud of you. We all are. Don't ruin her moment. So that was it. I wasn't a daughter. I was a funding source. A means to an end. A prop for their social media fairy tale. That email didn't just confirm my worst fears, it gave me purpose. I booked a consultation with a lawyer the next morning, then I called Aunt Patricia. When I finished explaining everything, she let out a long sigh. They did something similar to Ryan, she said. Timeshare scam. They forged his name, too. He ended up just paying it off to keep the peace. Not me, I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. I'm not giving in. You're doing the right thing, she said. Just be ready. They'll come after you harder now. And she was right. The attorney, Natalie Hoffman, welcomed me into her Midtown office with a firm handshake and steely gaze. Her warmth was professional. Her questions were sharp. After examining every page, she looked up and removed her reading glasses. This isn't murky. It's criminal. Your mother committed fraud. You're legally in the clear if we report it immediately, but you'll need to brace for backlash. What if I don't press charges? I asked. You can still have the dealership and bank remove your name. They'll likely pursue charges themselves. Or, you can pay for a vehicle you never agreed to and keep pretending this is okay. The choice was clear. I'd spent years justifying the unjustifiable, not anymore. By the time I left her office, I'd retained her services. That night, I switched off my phone after forwarding every message and voicemail to Natalie. I opened a fresh email account. Changed all my passwords. Enabled two-factor authentication across every platform. Even froze my credit. I was done being their ATM. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the start of my own story. The invitation, or, more accurately, the summons, arrived via voicemail that Friday afternoon. My mother's voice was tight, clipped, layered with a passive-aggressive sweetness she used like perfume, heavy and masking something sour underneath. Amber Elizabeth Mitchell, we need to talk about this car situation like adults. We're hosting dinner tomorrow at 7. Jessica will be there. We expect you. There was no question, no room for hesitation. In her mind, this was a return to the old script. I'd show up, get chastised, and then ultimately fold beneath the weight of generational obligation. But I wasn't the same person anymore. That version of me had withered somewhere between the forged signature and the attempted savings theft. Still, I agreed, not because I hoped for reconciliation, but because I needed to say what I'd swallowed for 29 years. Saturday evening arrived cold and damp. The familiar white columns of my parents' colonial loomed like pillars of an empire built on denial. Jessica's brand new SUV gleamed in the driveway like a trophy. My own vehicle, modest but mine, sat on the curb unnoticed. I rang the bell. The door swung open with surgical precision. My mother greeted me with an air kiss that never touched skin. So glad you came, darling, she said as she led me toward the dining room. Her silk blouse was immaculate, her pearls resting just so. But I could see the tightness in her jaw. Control was slipping, and she knew it. Inside, Jessica lounged at the head of the table, scrolling through her phone. Freshly manicured nails tapping away like she was composing her acceptance speech for most entitled sibling of the year. My father stood beside the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. Sit, he said, gesturing toward the chair across from Jessica. Let's have a civil discussion. The table was set with china and candlelight. Beef stroganoff, Jessica's favorite. Not mine. I hated it, had always hated it. But that detail had never mattered. Before I even picked up a fork, my father launched into his performance. First, we want to express our dismay at the way you've handled this misunderstanding. Involving legal counsel? Accusing your own mother of forgery? That's not how we resolve things in this family. I didn't respond immediately. I let his words sit in the air like cigarette smoke, lingering, offensive, difficult to ignore. Finally, I asked, and how exactly do we resolve things, Dad? By signing my name without asking? By draining my accounts while pretending we're close? By cutting me out of celebrations and acting like I'm overreacting? Jessica rolled her eyes and dropped her utensils. Oh my God, are you seriously still whining about that Christmas thing? It was just a small party. It wasn't small, I said. It was everyone. Everyone except me. Jessica threw her hands up dramatically. You make everything about you. You always act like you're better than everyone, your job, your apartment, your precious boundaries. My mother reached over and touched Jessica's wrist gently. Amber, you know how emotional your sister is. You've always been a bit jealous of her attention. Frankly, it's not flattering. There it was. The narrative. Jessica the delicate flower. Amber the resentful overachiever. Nothing I could say would penetrate the mythology they'd built. I'm not paying for the vehicle, I said, calmly but firmly. The documents were forged. I've taken the appropriate steps to protect myself. And I've frozen every account you may have had access to. My father's tone dropped an octave. After everything we've done for you? I leaned forward. What exactly have you done for me, besides remind me constantly that I should be grateful for having food and shelter as a child? I earned my scholarships. I paid off my loans. I built my life without help. Meanwhile, you covered for Jessica's chaos over and over, and now you've committed a crime to keep up appearances. My mother narrowed her eyes. We gave you opportunities. No, I said. You gave me expectations. And when I exceeded them, you punished me for not playing helpless. Jessica stood suddenly, knocking her chair back. No wonder no one likes you. Even your boyfriend left because you're cold. I flinched. She didn't know I was aware she'd been sleeping with him. My silence, though, said enough. Jessica paled. I turned to my father. So what's the consequence if I don't play along? No inheritance? No holiday invites? No Mitchell name to lean on? His voice was low, warning. You walk out of here tonight without agreeing to fix this, and you're done. You'll be cut off. No contact. No family. I placed my napkin beside my untouched plate. That's not a punishment. That's a relief. I stood. My mother's voice trembled for the first time all evening. Jessica needs that car. What's she supposed to do? The same thing I did when I needed transportation, I replied. Buy something she can actually afford. And with that, I walked out. As I pulled away, headlights reflecting off the cold asphalt, my phone buzzed. I didn't look at it. I didn't need to, because the silence that followed wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. The drive home was strangely quiet, the kind of hush that presses against your ears when the air shifts after a thunderclap. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't replay their faces or their voices. Not yet. I just drove, fingers gripping the steering wheel, vision blurring as streetlights passed like ghosts in the glass. When I reached my apartment, I didn't take off my coat or shoes. I stood in the doorway, frozen, as if the reality of what I'd done hadn't caught up yet. I'd walked away. Said the things I'd buried. Exposed every secret I wasn't supposed to say aloud. The truth should have felt like a release. But it felt like grief, not because I regretted anything, but because I finally admitted what I'd known deep down for years. I had no family. I had a group of people who tolerated my existence when it was convenient. Who weaponized obligation. Who shaped their love into currency, exchanged only when it benefited them. Over the next few days, the weight of that realization grew heavier. Nights became long stretches of silence filled with doubt. Had I been too harsh? Was there some middle ground I could have offered? Were these relationships worth saving, even in fractured form? The questions came uninvited, like bruises you don't remember earning. To stop spiraling, I did something I'd avoided for years. I found a therapist. Dr. Laura Chin specialized in family trauma and intergenerational dysfunction. She had kind eyes and didn't flinch when I dumped a lifetime of emotional wreckage onto her office. Are you in our second session? She asked a question that gutted me. If someone you cared about told you this exact story, word for word, what would you advise them to do? I answered without hesitation. Run. Then why is it different for you? She asked gently. I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense outside the cage I'd lived in for nearly 3 decades. Meanwhile, the Mitchell family launched their smear campaign with machine-like precision. Jessica's social media exploded with curated sob stories, photos of her beside the car, radiant and grateful, hashtagged with phrases like hashtag best sister ever, hashtag family support, hashtag she gets me. She tagged me in every post. The implication was crystal clear. I was the benefactor, the big-hearted sibling who swooped in to rescue the poor, misunderstood golden child. The manipulation was insidious. It was preemptive PR. They knew I was unraveling their narrative behind the scenes, and they were racing to own the version that mattered most, the public one. What they didn't count on was that I no longer cared about optics, but their campaign didn't end there. My phone started buzzing with strange calls. Friends texted me, asking if I was okay. Coworkers asked if I needed help. Apparently, my mother had begun contacting people in my life, painting me as unstable, overwhelmed, and emotionally fragile. She called my workplace, left a message for my boss, Sandra. That evening, Sandra pulled me aside after our client debrief. Your father called the office, she said, her brow furrowed. He was very concerned about your mental health and financial confusion. Said you might be under a lot of pressure. I waited for the other shoe to drop. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, I've worked with Wall Street fixers for 2 decades. That was the most transparent damage control I've ever seen. I let out a shaky breath. Amber, whatever they're trying to pull, it's not working. Not here. That one conversation undid days of spiraling. Not everyone believed their lies, not everyone saw me as unhinged for wanting peace. Reinforced by Sandra's support, I met with Marcus, my financial advisor. I explained everything, the loan, the forged signature, the attempted theft. His response was swift: we need to wall off your finances. Completely. Within hours, we had transferred all accounts to new banks, updated every security measure, changed beneficiary listings and revoked any shared permissions, requested a full credit report and fraud watch, and that's when the next shock hit. There had been another attempt to use my identity.an application for a luxury furniture store credit card had been submitted in my name just 2 days after the vehicle paperwork had gone through. It had been denied, thankfully, because of the fraud alert Marcus had flagged, but the implication was clear. This wasn't about a one-time overstep, they were building an empire off my back. When Jessica's post started turning darker, the projection was almost theatrical. Captions like, "Protect your joy, even when it's family who wants to destroy it," paired with selfies in front of the now doomed SUV, supportive comments poured in from distant cousins, childhood neighbors, and family friends who had no idea what was really happening. But I wasn't angry. I was numb, until the final text came through. Jessica again. This time, intoxicated. The spelling was a mess, the punctuation non-existent, but the sentiment hit like a freight train. You think you are better than everyone, but you are just a lonely BTCH with no one. Mom and dad only put up with you for money. We laugh at you. Enjoy. You are empty apartment while I enjoy my car. Didn't hurt. It clarified. There, in slurred fragments and careless cruelty, was everything I needed to move forward. This wasn't family. It was extraction. The next morning, I called Natalie. I'm ready, I told her. Let's file the fraud claim. She paused. You're sure? I didn't hesitate. They left me no choice. With one phone call, I stepped into territory I could never retreat from. The hold music on the fraud department line buzzed in my ear, but my decision was steady. When the representative finally answered, I didn't stammer. My name is Amber Mitchell, I said clearly. I need to report a forged signature on an auto loan. I was listed as a co-signer without permission. The woman on the other end took my information, her tone calm and clinical. After verifying my identity, she transferred me to a supervisor named Robert. He sounded seasoned, composed, like he'd handled too many of these calls before. Miss Mitchell, thank you for bringing this to our attention, he began. Family fraud cases are unfortunately not uncommon. It takes courage to speak up. I provided every detail: the envelope, the documents, the timeline, the note from Jessica, the conversation with my father. I mentioned Natalie Hoffman, my attorney. He listened carefully and promised a swift investigation. We'll need 5 to 7 business days, Robert explained. If our findings align with what you've shared, the loan will be removed from your credit history. We'll initiate repossession proceedings unless the other party can qualify independently. They wouldn't. Jessica's financial track record resembled a dumpster fire: unpaid bills, defaulted cards, collection agency calls. My parents might be able to assume the debt, but doing so would violate their core principle: never using their own money if mine was available. Please continue with the process, I said. I want this removed. After I hung up, I didn't feel immediate relief. I sat in my apartment, alone, motionless, almost weightless. Something irreversible had occurred. I had started the unraveling. The texts began that afternoon. Jessica led the charge. Her messages were an emotional roller coaster: rage, denial, begging, threats, flattery, victimhood. Then voicemails. Each one more frantic than the last. They took my car, Amber. I was at the mall. I'm stranded. You destroyed my life. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I blocked her number. Next came my father's fury. He left a voicemail thick with fury, disguised as heartbreak. What you've done is monstrous. Your mother is devastated. Jessica is inconsolable. I never imagined my daughter capable of this level of cruelty. We will never forgive this betrayal. Delete. Block.my inbox swelled with messages from relatives acting like referees. Aunt Gwen wrote, "Can't you work this out privately?" Uncle Stephen texted, "You're better than this." Even second cousins chimed in with moralistic soundbites about unity and forgiveness. No one asked for my version. Nobody wanted to hear about the forged documents or the savings account intrusion. They weren't interested in truth. They were invested in comfort, and I disrupted the narrative. I responded with silence. Then, without hesitation, I disabled every social media account I had. They couldn't twist what they couldn't tag. Within 48 hours, Jessica launched a full-blown Instagram pity parade. Teary-eyed selfies captioned, "When the people you trust turn out to be your worst enemies," flooded her feed. She posted screenshots of the car being towed away, hashtags like hashtag betrayed by blood and hashtag support doesn't he come from family. The comments were vicious. Strangers and extended family piled on, calling me selfish, cold-hearted, vindictive. I said nothing. Natalie, thankfully, said plenty. She fielded a call from my mother's lawyer the next day. They're scrambling, she informed me. Now that the dealership and bank have confirmed the forgery, your mother is facing serious legal exposure. They're proposing a settlement. I blinked. Already? They know the case is airtight. What they want now is a way out that doesn't involve handcuffs. What are the options? I asked. We can press criminal charges and let the legal system handle it. Or we can negotiate an agreement. They pay your legal fees, formally admit to the fraud in writing, and sign binding paperwork ensuring they'll never access your finances again. And in return? I asked. You agree not to prosecute. The choice wasn't easy. A part of me wanted justice. Real justice. Courtrooms, consequences, public fallout, but another part, the part that had finally tasted peace, just wanted it over. I don't want her in prison, I said. Not because I care about her suffering, but because I want out. I want clean closure. Then I'll draft the terms, Natalie said. While she prepared the documents, I focused on something I hadn't felt in years: safety. With my accounts locked down, passwords changed, and boundaries reinforced, I slept through the night without dread coiled in my stomach. I even went back to Leah's for dinner, her father's lasagna steaming on the table, her mother teasing her about her overcooked rolls. There was no judgment. No transaction. They passed the bread basket without asking for anything in return. A few days later, the bank officially completed their investigation. Robert called with a final update. Miss Mitchell, your name has been removed from the loan. The repossession has been completed. You no longer carry any financial responsibility. Thank you, I said softly. You did the right thing, he added. Most people stay silent. You didn't. I ended the call and sat in the quiet. For a long time. My family had stolen from me, but they couldn't steal my voice, and now, they couldn't touch my peace either. Natalie called 3 days after the repossession, her tone brisk but satisfied. They've agreed to everything, she said. Your legal costs, notarized admissions of wrongdoing, and enforceable documents preventing future contact or financial interference. My breath caught. I'd expected resistance, drama, perhaps even another round of public shaming. But instead, compliance. They're terrified, she continued. They know what forged contracts can do in court. They're trying to end this quietly, before prosecutors get involved. The contrast between their arrogance weeks earlier and this sudden surrender was surreal. I'd gone from ATM to adversary. Now, they were backing down. We signed the agreement the following Friday. No courtroom. No audience. Just 2 attorneys, 2 pens, and a few signatures that finally did something honest. After the ink dried, Natalie looked up. They blinked first, she said. You took your power back. I nodded, but didn't speak. My throat had tightened. Not from sadness. From something closer to relief. Later that night, I poured a glass of wine and sat on my couch, unsure what to feel. The war was technically over. Yet the ache remained. I'd spent years imagining what liberation might look like. I thought it would involve shouting, slamming doors, dramatic final words. Instead, it looked like silence. Signed papers. Legal boundaries that said more than decades of conversations ever had. Then my phone buzzed. Aunt Patricia just wanted to say, well done, she said. They've been pulling this kind of thing for years. You're the first one who didn't flinch. I paused. Others? She sighed. Cousin Ryan. Your uncle's oldest. They forged his name on a timeshare deal. He didn't want to start drama, so he paid it off. Never recovered financially. The knot in my chest twisted tighter. I wasn't just a fluke. I was one in a line of sacrifices. Why didn't anyone warn me? Because we were all scared of being disowned, she admitted. Or worse, publicly humiliated. The call ended with a quiet, I'm proud of you. But that wasn't the last voice to reach out. 3 days later, a new email appeared. In my inbox. The subject line, from Taylor. My cousin, the one who posted the Christmas photos. Amber, I've been thinking a lot about what happened during the holidays, and after. I didn't know the full story back then. I believed the version they gave me. I'm sorry, her message wasn't long, but it didn't feel hollow. There was no defensive tone. Just acknowledgement. A glimmer of accountability. If you're open to it, I'd like to reconnect. On your terms. No pressure. We met for coffee the following week. Neutral ground. No gifts. No guilt. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that wasn't physical. We talked for over an hour. About our parents, about Jessica, about growing up in a household that valued image over intimacy. They never saw us, Taylor admitted. They just used us to project their version of success. I nodded. I knew that feeling too well. We didn't hug goodbye. We weren't there yet. But something began to shift. That same week, Marcus called with an update on my credit. Freeze. No new attempts since the furniture store card. Looks like the message finally landed. Good, I said. Let's keep it frozen another 6 months, just in case. I wasn't taking chances. I also wasn't interested in rekindling anything with Jessica, or my parents. They'd gone quiet after the settlement. No messages. No passive-aggressive gestures through extended relatives. Just, absence. It felt less like abandonment and more like a final, welcome silence, and then, just when I thought it was over, another message arrived, blocked number, unfamiliar. Sender, the text was short. Bitter, you think you've won. But you're still alone. Enjoy your money and your empty life, Jessica. Even after everything, after court documents, public tantrums, financial failure, she still couldn't let go of the illusion that I was somehow worse off. She thought exile was punishment, but for me, it was peace. That evening, I had dinner at Leah's again. Her mom made brisket. Her dad lit candles even though it wasn't a holiday. They passed bowls, laughed over burnt vegetables, teased one another gently. No1 asked what I could offer in return. No1 kept scores. Leah raised her glass and said, to Amber, for choosing herself. I clinked mine gently because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I had my own. 6 months slipped by. The heat of summer wrapped itself around Manhattan like a heavy quilt, but inside my apartment, everything was lighter. The legal fight had ended. The fraud was resolved. My name had been cleared, my finances locked down, my peace reclaimed. I had no intention of ever going back. Jessica now drove a used sedan, financed under her name, with a steep interest rate and no flashy badge on the grille. I'd heard from Patricia that my parents reluctantly co-signed after exhausting every alternative. The Mercedes had been a short-lived trophy. Now, reality had taken the wheel. My parents avoided me entirely, not out of guilt, but because I had become a mirror they couldn't look into without seeing their own reflection. Still, I wasn't untouched by the aftermath. There were nights when I woke up sweating, haunted by echoes of childhood dinners and holidays that had never felt quite right. On Mother's Day, I stood in the greeting card aisle at the corner drugstore for 20 minutes before walking out empty-handed. Every glossy envelope praised love I'd never received. It felt like shopping for a fiction novel that had been written about someone else's life, but with the grief came freedom. I stopped apologizing for my boundaries. My job performance improved. Without constant stress, I found focus again. Projects I once dreaded became outlets. My supervisor took notice, awarding me a bonus that I invested, without consulting anyone. No surprise charges. No passive-aggressive texts about emergencies. No more, you make more than you need. Just silence. In that space, I rediscovered what it meant to live. I joined a book club. I hiked. I hosted a dinner party for coworkers and didn't spend a second worrying if the wine selection met my parents' imagined standards. I even started dating again. This time, I didn't filter myself down to make someone else comfortable. I didn't ignore red flags or accept less than I deserved. I remembered what Dr. Chin had told me during one of our earlier sessions: healthy people aren't repelled by your boundaries, they're attracted to them. One afternoon in July, an email arrived from Patricia. She and her husband Stephen were celebrating 40 years of marriage with a small lake house gathering. No drama. No games. Just grilled salmon, laughter, and real connection. And absolutely no other Mitchells, she promised. I smiled. I said yes. That weekend was unlike any family event I had ever attended. The air was warm, the lake calm, the company intentional. Patricia, away from the sharp edges of my parents' influence, revealed a sense of humor I'd never seen before. Her eyes sparkled when she told stories. Her laughter was unfiltered, real. We sat on the dock with our feet in the water, watching the sun melt into the treeline. She handed me a glass of iced tea and said, "Your mother's always been like this, measuring worth by what she can extract from people." I nodded. She didn't start with you. She just refined the strategy. And my father? Same game. Different tactics. When they married, it was like two mirrors facing each other. Nothing but reflection. No depth. She glanced at me sideways. But you? You were never like them. And that's why they resented you. I didn't argue. It felt true, and hearing it from someone else was a kind of balm I didn't know I needed. But perhaps the most surprising message arrived in late August. An email from Taylor. Again, only this time, it wasn't about apologies. It was an update. "Jessica's imploding," she wrote. "Since you cut ties, the pressure shifted. Your parents expected her to step into your shoes. Take control. Fun things. Manage chaos. But she can't. And now everything's unraveling." I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sad, not for Jessica, for the part of myself that had once believed I could fix everything by just trying harder. Taylor's message ended with an unexpected confession. "They even asked me to co-sign something last week. A line of credit. I said no. I read those words 3 times, something had changed. My choice to break free had started a chain reaction. I had thought I was alone, turns out, I was just the first one to say it out loud. Autumn arrived like a quiet exhale, gold leaves brushing sidewalks, air crisp with beginnings. The kind of season that whispered transition, not in grand declarations but in small shifts. My apartment smelled like cinnamon and eucalyptus, the windows open just enough to invite in the scent of change. By October, a full year had passed since I'd made the mistake of inviting my family for that Manhattan weekend. The last attempt to glue together something that had been splintered from the start. A version of love that had always been transactional, just dressed up in tradition and holiday packaging. Now, there were no expectations. No frantic calls. No guilt-laced obligations tied to birthdays or anniversaries. Instead, my life belonged to me. I had rebuilt routines from scratch, ones that didn't revolve around emotional damage control. I cooked for myself, walked home without dread coiled in my chest. I even booked a solo weekend getaway upstate, something unthinkable before. I no longer feared being alone. I welcomed it. That's not to say healing was easy. There were still moments, like when I passed a mother and daughter laughing over coffee and felt something sour rise in my throat. Or when a friend casually mentioned their siblings' help during a stressful week, and I bit my lip to stop the ache from surfacing. Those were the echoes. Dr. Chin called them emotional phantom pains, the invisible scars that flare up even after the wound is closed. The goal isn't to never hurt again, she reminded me during one of our final sessions. It's to stop mistaking pain for proof of love. And then, just when I thought I'd moved beyond surprises, a message appeared. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. The message read, "I hate what you did. But I get it now." My stomach tightened. Jessica, Dad and Mom are making me plan Thanksgiving. They expect me to cover everything. When I said I couldn't, Dad suggested I borrow from my 401k. I blinked. I remembered what you said about buying what you can actually afford. You were right. Then, one final line, don't reply. If they find out I contacted you, I'll deny everything. Just wanted you to know. No apology, but something more honest than I ever expected. Recognition. She hadn't changed overnight. She might never break free completely. But for one fleeting moment, she saw the truth. And admitted it. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because silence felt right. I had no desire to reopen wounds, just to test their tenderness. That message wasn't an invitation. It was a whisper through a cracked door, barely ajar. A sign that the truth had landed, even if it came with denial stapled to the back, and oddly, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad for the girls still tangled in their web, but I felt proud of the woman who had escaped. As the holiday season approached again, I didn't buy airline tickets. I didn't browse gift guides for people who'd never appreciated anything I gave. I didn't mentally prepare for backhanded compliments disguised as small talk. Instead, I said yes to Leah's invitation to her family's cabin in Vermont. I agreed to help decorate cookies with her nieces, to chop firewood, to volunteer at a local shelter on Christmas Eve, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for it. This year, there was time, there was space, there was peace, real peace, not the kind you manufacture by suppressing your needs, but the kind that rises naturally when you stop asking the wrong people for approval. I had built a circle that didn't require bending over backwards to keep. Colleagues had become friends. Friends had become chosen family, not because they shared my bloodline, but because they respected my boundaries, because they listened, because they stayed, even when I wasn't useful. That winter, I watched snow fall from a cabin window while laughter echoed from the next room. My phone rested on the counter, silent, not because no one cared, but because I wasn't needed to fix anything. I was just wanted, and that, I realized, made all the difference. New Year's Eve arrived not with fireworks, but with something softer, contentment. I stood in my apartment, watching city lights flicker beneath a pale sky, a cup of tea warming my palms. No crowds. No countdowns. Just peace. The kind that doesn't require distraction to feel tolerable. I thought about what the Mitchell name used to mean to me: prestige, performance, punishment. Now it was just a surname, nothing more. A label I no longer carried like armor or chains. Just ink on paper that held no power unless I handed it meaning. In the days leading up to the new year, I cleaned out drawers, donated clothes I didn't wear, and let go of objects that belonged to a life I had outgrown. A framed photo of my family on the Cape went into a storage bin, not because I hated the memory, but because I no longer needed reminders of a version of myself built around their approval. It was in that quiet cleansing that I found clarity. I hadn't just escaped toxicity. I had reclaimed authorship. They no longer got to define me. They didn't own the narrative. I wasn't the bitter sister, the difficult daughter, the cold woman who chose career over closeness. I was the one who stopped the cycle, and that's a legacy worth holding. On the first Monday of January, I returned to work energized. I wrapped up a presentation that would later be nominated for Internal Innovation Awards. My name, Amber Mitchell, stood boldly at the top of the deck. Nobody knew the backstory. No one needed to. It was mine. In therapy, Dr. Chin had once said that the most powerful shift comes not from confrontation, but from choosing not to re-enter the arena. You won't heal by going back into the storm to prove you're dry, she said. You heal when you stop trying to explain why you walked away. She was right. I no longer felt the need to justify anything to anyone, especially not to those who had mistaken my silence for permission and my success for obligation. Still, there were moments that pressed against old wounds. A colleague once said in passing, I can't imagine cutting off my mother, no matter what. The comment wasn't malicious. Just naive. I smiled politely and didn't respond, because unless you've lived it, walked the tightrope between loyalty and survival, you can't understand what it takes to choose yourself over inherited dysfunction, and that's okay. My story didn't need universal validation. It just needed to be true. One evening in February, I hosted a small dinner at my place. Leah came with her boyfriend, Marcus brought his partner, and a few friends from my hiking group joined. We drank wine, swapped stories, and laughed so loudly my neighbors knocked on the wall, twice. At one point, as I cleared dishes, Leah leaned in and whispered, You seem happy. I paused, not because I disagreed, but because it had been so long since I felt that statement fit, and now, it did. Yeah, I said. I really am. There was no grand event. No magical resolution, just a slow, steady unraveling of lies I'd been fed my entire life, and the quiet power of replacing them with truth, the truth that family isn't defined by shared genetics, that peace doesn't come from pleasing everyone, that self-respect isn't selfish, it's survival, the truth that choosing yourself again and again isn't lonely. It's brave, and brave looks good on me. Spring arrived subtly, the city thawing beneath sunlight that stayed just a little longer each evening. My walks home were no longer rushed escapes from cold pavement and colder thoughts. I paused at crosswalks without checking my phone. I took side streets lined with blooming dogwoods just to breathe in moments I once overlooked. By now, my name no longer circulated through whispered family calls or backchannel gossip. The smear campaign had withered without fuel. The texts stopped. The silence endured, not as absence, but as space. That, I learned, is the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is a craving for connection. Solitude is choosing peace over noise, and I was full, not of bitterness, not of grudges, but of clarity. Taylor and I continued meeting every few weeks, coffee, walks through Central Park, an occasional movie. We never brought up my parents unless it was to laugh at how little power their theatrics held now. During one of those walks, she said, It's weird. You leaving didn't break anything. It just showed what was already broken. I didn't respond immediately. Because sometimes the truest things don't need confirmation. By late April, I had compiled all my financial documents into a clean, updated portfolio, secure accounts, future planning, and a folder labeled Legacy. Not inheritance. Not old property titles. But a different kind of asset, my boundaries, my choices, my blueprint for never going back. And that legacy? It wasn't just for me. It was for whoever I built life with next: partner, friend, child, community. A life where love wasn't earned through sacrifice. Where support was mutual, not extracted. One Sunday afternoon, Leah's parents invited me to a backyard barbecue. Her mother had just returned from visiting relatives in Oregon and brought back homemade jam, which she handed to me without pretense or expectation. To our extended daughter, she said with a smile. It wasn't a grand gesture. It didn't need to be. Acceptance often arrives in the smallest acts. Later that evening, Leah and I sat on her porch sipping ginger tea. She tilted her head and asked, Do you ever miss them? I didn't answer right away, because grief isn't always sharp. Sometimes, it's just quiet. I don't miss who they were, I said eventually. I miss the idea of who they could have been. She nodded, and we sat in that honesty without trying to fix it. Grief doesn't always mean regret. Sometimes, it just marks where something meaningful could have grown. If only there had been soil. In May, I submitted a personal essay to a publication about reclaiming boundaries after familial betrayal. I used a pseudonym, but the words were mine. Every sentence poured out of a truth I'd been terrified to speak for years. The editor replied within a week, We'd be honored to publish this. When the piece went live, the comments rolled in. Dozens. Then hundreds, some from readers who had lived similar stories. Others who had never imagined parents could treat children that way, but who now understood someone in their lives a little better. One comment stood out. One morning in June, I found myself at the local shelter where I'd started volunteering months earlier. A young woman had come in with her toddler, fleeing a situation that echoed pieces of my own past, different details, same damage. I handed her a glass of water and said nothing, just sat beside her as she unraveled. Sometimes, the most powerful comfort is simply presence. Not advice. not solutions. Just bearing witness. That's what I had learned over this year. Not everything needs to be mended, some things need to be left behind, so you have room to grow. That weekend, I joined Leah's family at their Vermont cabin. The same one where, last Christmas, I'd begun rewriting my story. This time, I arrived not as a guest, but as part of the foundation. The seat at the table wasn't borrowed. It was mine. On the last night, her father made a toast to chosen families, the kind that show up not because they have to, but because they want to. We clinked glasses. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. My smile held more than tears ever could. Back home, I planted a few herbs on my balcony. Nothing fancy. Just basil, mint, and thyme. I watered them every morning, watching them reach toward the sun. Growth isn't loud. It's steady. Boundaries, I learned, are like garden fences, not to shut people out, but to protect what's trying to bloom inside. I stopped wondering whether my parents thought of me. Whether Jessica still painted herself as a victim. Whether distant cousins whispered about the one who cut off her family. Because none of that defined me. My life wasn't built to prove anything to anyone. It wasn't a rebuttal. It was a rebirth. That fall, I signed a lease on a new apartment, sunny, open, a place that felt like breathing room. No inherited furniture. No photos of people who never really saw me. Just colors I liked, textures that soothed, shelves filled with books I actually read. On the wall, I hung a single framed print. It read, "You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." I saw it every morning. And every time I did, I remembered what it cost to choose myself, not comfort. Not convenience, but freedom. One evening, I sat on my couch, sipping tea and reflecting on the storm I'd survived. If you had told me a year earlier that I would lose my entire family and feel lighter, not lonelier, I wouldn't have believed you. But now, I knew better. Family isn't about shared bloodlines. It's about shared values, respect, support, truth, and real love, the kind that heals rather than harms, doesn't come with contracts or expectations. It shows up. It stays. It grows with you. If you've been watching my journey and something inside you resonates, know this: you're not selfish for needing peace. You're not wrong for walking away. You're not heartless for wanting more than obligation disguised as love. You deserve relationships that fill your soul, not ones that empty your spirit. You deserve to be safe, you deserve to be seen, and most of all, you deserve to choose yourself. Thank you for listening. I'm Amber, and I'm finally free.